Hey everyone, how's it going? My name is Dumpling, and I'm going to do a teach and playthrough of Arkham Horror the card game. This is my favorite game, and I just want to do a very concise uh, teach of the game. Is also going to be a bit of a run and teach. This is the way I like to teach it to new people. So we were going to do that. We're going to be doing the first scenario of the core set, mainly because it's been out for so long and it shouldn't do much of a spoiler for people that haven't played the game before. I will do a warning of if you don't want spoilers, stop the video here. But we should have everything covered before that point would happen. So, welcome to Arkham Horror, the card game. So, the first things we need to look at, what are you doing and what is happening? Every player is going to be playing as an investigator who is going in and researching, investigating, hunting monsters, finding what is going on in this scenario. These investigators are all random people who happen to have really horrible things happen to them, and they just get involved. So that's what the premise is of the game. The way the game works is everyone has their investigator card. There is a huge variety of investigators in the game you can play as, and there are 5 specific classes you can play as. There's Guardian, which is mainly focused on fighting monsters, also the blue class. The yellow class called Seeker, which they are more focused on finding clues, which actually helps advance the game state. You have Rogues, which are green. They have a very weird play style where they like a lot of money. They try to break the rules to get things in the game. Survivors, which are red, typically like to thrive on failure. So if something bad happens, they have a way to circumvent that or get a benefit out of it. And then we have purple or mystics, which use typically one type of skill test, the intellect or the brain, willpower, to get a lot of things done, use spells, and they can be kind of a flex spot. They can kind of do a bit of everything. And then there's one neutral class card called Lola, which we don't talk about. But let's take a quick look at what an investigator card is and what information it gives you. So this is how every investigator card is going to be laid out. You have your portrait, the name of your character, a little like flavor text about them, and then the class they belong to. And then the very top here, there's 4 different stats. And every investigator has these 4 stats. So first you have your willpower, which we just call brain. And then typically you're going to be using this if you're a mystic. A lot of things will look at this, and you'll use this skill test majority of the time to defend yourself against the game, which we'll talk about later. You have your intellect or book. You'll be using this number to investigate and get clues from locations. You have your fight, fist. You'll be using this to fight against monsters typically. And then you also have agility or foot, and you'll be using this to evade monsters, and you can be using this as well to defend yourself against some cards from the game. Typically, your willpower and your agility are going to be your defensive stats. Also, on your card, you have a little bit more of like flavor tags, and then every investigator comes with an ability, either a reaction ability or a fast ability or an ability you can activate, something passive. And then underneath that, every investigator also has an Elder Sign ability, which is indicated by this little star right there. So an Elder Sign ability will go off if you pull the Elder Sign out of the Mythos bag, which we'll talk about later. And then underneath that, some might have some more flavor text here. And then we have your 2 different types of life, you would call. So you have your health and you have your sanity. If either of these go to 0, your investigator is out for the round, or for the remainder of the scenario. And then on the back, you have a lot of flavor, their backstory, and also their deck building options and requirements for their deck. Other important things to look at. So what counters are there in the game? So we're playing on TTS, so the counters are a bit different, but typically you have damage tokens, which will track your health and damage you put on monsters, your sanity tokens, which will, track how much horror you have. Then you have Doom, which we'll talk about later, and you have your clues, which are what you're going to be trying to get to advance the game. Other things to know that there is a mechanic in this game that if you're familiar with games that have RNG mechanics like die rolling, there is a die in this game, but instead of dice, you have your chaos bag, which will be here in this. And these are tokens you're pulling out of the game during skill checks to see if you pass or fail the test. If you've played any of the Arkham or Eldritch Horror board games before, this is pretty familiar to that. Yeah, that's a nice overview of what your investigator looks like. So, this is your investigator deck. Everything you're going to be doing in the game and how well you're going to be boosting yourself and being able to fight things is going to be based off of what cards are in your deck and what you have put in your deck. So, there are 4 different types of cards in your deck, and we will do a quick overview of them right now. And 4. All right. Let's also put myself in the master mode so we can see everything. Okay, so the 4 types of cards you will find in a typical Arkham Horror deck are as follows. So first, you have assets, which you can tell what they are by this title up here in the top left. This says asset here. So assets are cards that once you play, they will be played in front of your character, and they are permanent. They'll be out in play until something causes them to get discarded, removed, if they're defeated. And these will give you continuous things to do throughout the game, as long as they're in front of you. So like this Beat Cop, for example, when you put him into play, you get +1 fist. So you get an additional fist stat, which is great for fist tests. And then he also has a fast ability, which is his lightning bolt. And you can discard him to deal a damage to an enemy at your location. So he's good. You basically throw him at an enemy and sacrifice him, and he punches them on his way to the other side. Also with these ally assets, they also have their own health and sanity pools, which we can talk about later. These assets also will more than likely have a icon down here in the bottom right. So this one has this person outline. So some assets take up slots on your character. And the way that the slots work are you can have one of any type of asset that has a symbol in the bottom right. So one ally, one body slot, one accessory or necklace slot, one tarot card, which you won't need to worry about right now. And then you have 2 hand slots and 2 arcane slots. These hand slots are typically going to be used for weapons, and these arcane slots are typically going to be used for spells and magic. And then some assets might not have anything down there in the bottom corner at all, like a talent. And those you can have as many out as you want. Now, the next card we have are events, which will say event right here. So unlike assets, when you play an event card, they will get their ability right away, and then they get discarded. They're basically just really good one-shots to help you out for a specific situation that you're in, or a scenario that you're in, or like an ability you just want to get off right away really quick, and then they'll go away. So, and the thing to look at with both the assets and the events, in the top left corner, there's a number. So here there's a 4 on the Beat Cop, a 0 on this Drawn to the Flame. That's the cost you're going to be spending to play this card. Now, what is the cost? So you have resources down here, or here if you're playing the physical version of the game, this is what they look like. These resources are what you're spending to put cards into play. So if I wanted to play this Beat Cop from my hand, I would have to spend 1, 2, 3, 4 resources to get him out. That's it. That's what your resources are for. Your resources are going to be strictly to be playing your cards. So, we talk about assets, you pay the cost, they get put in front of you permanently. You have events, you pay the cost, you do the effect, and then they get discarded. And then the next card you have, which makes up your deck, is going to be skill cards, which says, again, up here in the top left. But as you can tell, skill cards do not have a cost. So the way skill cards work is, if you have noticed on these previous cards I talked about, that there's these little symbols underneath the name of the card right here. So like this Beat Cop has a fist, this Drawn to the Flame has a brain and a book. So Overpower here has 2 fists. So what these skill cards do specifically is when you're going to commit a skill check or do a skill, you can commit these skill cards from your hand to give you a temporary boost to the skill you're checking if the symbols align. So let's say I'm doing a fight test. I'm going to commit this Overpower card from my hand to give me a temporary +2 bonus to my fist. So Zoe has 4 normally, but if I commit this Overpower to my test, I have a temporary 6 to that stat. And then after your skill test resolves, you get a reward potentially on your skill card. So Overpowered, for example, says max 1 committed per skill test, which just means I can only play 1 copy of Overpowered per skill test I'm doing. But if I succeed, if this test is successful, I get to draw a card, which is great. So you get a boost and you get a nice bonus. If you notice, these other cards also have these skill icons onto them as well. So the cool thing with Arkham is you can commit any card in your hand to a skill test as long as the icons are applicable to the skill you're checking. So this beat cop can be either played for 4 resources and get all of his bonuses, or in a pinch, if I really need to pass a fight test, I can commit this beat cop to the test to give me a temporary +1 bonus to that test. And I don't have to pay the cost to do that. Any card you ever commit to a skill check, you don't have to pay the cost. You just get to throw the card down, get that temporary bonus, and the card is gone. So that's the thing you want to weigh out with your assets and your events. Is it more beneficial for you to hold the card to potentially get into play later or give you a powerful one-shot, or do you really need to commit them to a test right now for something you really have to pass? So this Drawn to the Flame has 2 different icons, so you could commit this to either a willpower brain check or an intellect book check, and it will give you +1 to either of those. And the last card to talk about here are these cards right here that say Treachery, and they are typically like this white-gray color, a big picture on the top. So these are weaknesses. Every investigator in the game has a unique weakness that goes in their deck that's specific to that character, along with a unique asset or event or special card that is unique to that character that goes in their deck. You will also get 1 randomized weakness in your deck as well before you start your scenario off. And that random weakness, when you deck build, stays in your deck for the rest of the cycle that you're playing. So these weaknesses, if they say Revelation, immediately when you draw them, you have to put them into play and do what they say. They are always bad. So not only is the game playing against you with the bad cards you'll be drawing later, but your own deck has temporary and potential problems in it as well. These are things you don't want to see. But the cool part with these treacheries, these weaknesses that are in your character deck that are unique to your character, they're very, very flavorful. They are very they're just really cool story-wise with what your character is and what they do. So they're really cool thematically, but they're horrible to actually draw. So these are the 4 types of cards in your deck. Assets, you'll pay the cost, put them into play, get these bonuses and benefits until they're gone. Events, you pay the cost, and you get this cool one-shot. Skills, which you commit to skill checks, and if you pass or fail your skill test based on what's down here, you get that ability. But keep in mind, any card can get committed to skill tests. And then you have weaknesses that if they have a revelation, which almost all of them do, once you draw them, they go into play and they're always bad. So those are the cards that you can have in your deck in Arkham. Let's shuffle. All right, so let's call that for now for rules, and now we're gonna do a run and teach. So the way the game works is the very first turn of the game, it starts in the investigator phase. So there's 4 phases in a round, but the first round we're gonna start in the investigator phase, and so we're gonna start there. The investigation phase is what you get to do. This is how you get most of your actions. This is how you're gonna be doing most of your stuff. Pretty much all your important things that you're doing and your partners are doing are going to happen in this investigation phase. So let's go ahead and do a quick read of the scenario we're in. So we are doing Night of the Zealot, and this is called The Gathering. So the backstory for The Gathering is, you and your partners have been investigating strange events taking place in your home city of Arkham, Massachusetts. Over the past few weeks, several townspeople have mysteriously gone missing. Recently, their corpses turned up in the woods, savaged and half-eaten. The police and newspapers have stated that wild animals are responsible, but you believe there is something else going on. You are gathered together at the lead investigator's home to discuss these bizarre events. So, when a scenario starts, you will also have to pick one investigator to be the lead investigator. And what that does is if there's something that is a final decision that needs to be made, the lead investigator has final call on this. There might be some cards that say lead investigator has to make a decision. That is not dictating your turn order, though. Turn order in this game is fluid. Every round you can pick a different turn order if you want, and turn by turn, like maybe something will happen at the end of a player's turn, like, oh, well, that changes what I wanted to do. Maybe someone else should go after him now instead, or her, which is great. Gives you a little bit more flexibility in a game that's really hard. So the situation or the scenario will tell us how to set everything up, and will tell us where we start. So we have locations in the game as well. And these are cards that are going to be out on the board and places that we're going to be moving to and from to do things in the game. So the beginning of the game, we start in the study. And there's two sides to locations. First, we have the unrevealed side, which is going to give us some flavor text here. So you've been investigating the strange events occurring in Arkham for several days now. Your desk is covered in newspaper articles, police reports, and witness accounts. Once an investigator goes to a location, or in this case, if we start in this location, it immediately flips to its revealed side. The door to your study has vanished. And there's important things to look at here. This top left symbol here is a location icon, which we'll talk about later. Then here is the shroud value, and here is the clue value. So this tells you how many clues are going to be on this location. So in this case, it is 2 clues, and this little symbol here means per investigator that's playing. We're playing with 2 investigators, so 2 times 2 is we put 4 clues on this location. Now, what is this shroud number? So this is the number you're going to test against if you want to get one of these clues off. And what number do you test against the shroud to get clues when you investigate? You use your book number, this intellect. This is what you use to investigate. So at the very start of the game now, after we do all that, each investigator draws 5 cards into their opening hand. If you draw any weaknesses, they get removed, and you get to replace that with something else. All right. Oh, this should be off to the side because this is a special type of card. So there's cards in the game that say bonded. Bonded means they don't go in your deck, they're outside of your deck. So let's go over here. So now that you draw your 5 opening cards, you are allowed to do a mulligan. So for the mulligan, you can discard any number of cards that you would like and immediately draw replacement cards for those. So a good advice for beginner players that I like to say is you want to start the game with a couple of assets in your hand, 2, maybe 3, because usually the first turn of the game is a really good time to just prep your character and get ready for what's to come. So we have 3 assets in our hand, but 2 of them are the same. So let's get rid of one of these machetes, and then we have 2 things to let us help fight, but I don't think we need this yet, so let's drop those 2 and draw 2 replacement cards. Okay, and then again, if you drew one of your weaknesses, you would immediately discard it and replace it. So this is going to be our opening hand. Anything you discarded and any weaknesses you drew in your opening hand, you will then take and shuffle back into your deck. Keep in mind, you do your mulligan first before you reshuffle everything in. Now let's do the same thing for Wendy. All right, so Wendy has no assets, so we want to do some definite hard mulligan to get some assets going. So let's just do a whole new hand. All right, still no assets, which is kind of rough, but let's see what we can do. All right, and then let's set, and this just depends on the game. So for TTS modes, I like counting down. So let's just set these both to 7 and 7 for her, and then 9 and 6 for Zoe. Okay, so now you're ready to start the game. So on your turn, during the investigation phase, each investigator gets 3 actions. And you have to take all 3 of your actions before the next investigator can go. So at this point in the game, we're only going to talk about the actions you can currently take with what is happening, and we're not going to learn about extra actions until they come up. I like doing this as more of a run and teach this way because it's a lot less information upload, and when you learn the information as it comes out, it kind of retains better. At least for me, this is how it works. So what can we do right now with the information that's available to us? So first, as mentioned, you can investigate as an action. As an action, you would investigate. And what does that entail? you look at the shroud number here, so 2, and you look at your skill number here, 2, and then you would, at this point, you have to decide if you want to commit cards to help you boost yourself during this skill check. You have to do this now. So I could discard cards from my hand, commit them to this. For example, this evidence, I could commit to her to give me a temporary +2 to my book and be at 4. Now, something I didn't mention before, you as the investigator on your own turn, you can commit as many cards as you want to that test, as long as the symbols apply. So if I had all 5 of these cards in my hand had book symbols on them, I could commit all 5 of these to Zoe right after the skill check if I wanted. It's just probably a waste, though. However, if you're in the same location as another investigator, you can commit 1 card to them to help them out during a skill test. Just 1. So I could commit as many as I want to myself, and because Wendy and I are in the same room right now, Wendy could commit 1 card to me if I wanted to investigate. Which, right now, I don't want to investigate because my investigation's not very good. But why do we want clues? So the reason we want clues is that's what helps us push the game along. So there are 2 decks at the top of the game up here. We have the agenda deck, and this is the game fighting against us. And there's the act deck, and this is what we want to push along to advance the game state and for us to win. So the agenda deck, what is this? Let's see what it says. What's going on? It is late at night. You're holed up in your study researching the bloody disappearances that have been taking place in the region. A few hours into your research, you hear the sound of strange chanting coming from your parlor down the hall. At the same time, you hear dirt churning as if something were digging beneath the floor. And there's a number here, 3. We'll talk about this number later. Now for us, the act. Act 1A, trapped. As you leap to investigate, the door to your study vanishes before your eyes, leaving behind only solid wall. You're trapped inside your study until you can find another way out. And then down here, instead of doom, you can see it's green, meaning clues. So we need to find 2 clues, and then this symbol we learned earlier means per investigator. So we need to find 4 clues total between all the investigators that are playing to advance this. So that's why we want clues. We want clues so we can push this along. So one of the actions you can take is investigating, which right now Zoe's not going to do. Another action you can do is you can spend 1 action to gain a resource, or you can spend an action to draw a card off the top of your deck. Typically in this game, drawing a card or getting a resource as an action is the least efficient thing you can do, and those are typically things you're going to do as last resorts, or if you really need the cards, or if you really need the resources, or you have nothing else to do on your turn. Typically, you don't want to do those things. Yeah. So, the 3 actions we've learned so far: investigating, gaining a resource, or drawing a card. What else can we do? Well, as another action, you can play cards from your hand, which, let's do that now. So, Zoe, as the Guardian, wants to kill monsters, and she wants weapons out to help her do so. So, let's play this machete. So, as our first action, we're going to spend 3 resources and play this machete into one of our hand slots. There. All right. So that's 1 action. So now we have this machete out, which gives us an ability. So another action you can do on your turn is activate cards that you have in front of you if they have this solid arrow icon right there. So you can activate this machete to fight. We don't know what that is yet because we don't have any monsters in play, so we don't need to worry about this yet. But keep in mind, you can activate cards with a solid arrow as an action. Remember, the other icons that you have to look out for are this reaction symbol here, this swoop arrow. So for Zoe, after you become engaged with an enemy, she gains a resource. So these reaction ones are after something occurs, you get to trigger this. And there's one other symbol to keep in mind for, and that's a lightning bolt, which we don't have out yet. But lightning bolts, well, I guess right here, this is what the lightning bolt looks like, right there. Or if your card says fast on it as the first word, like here, this lucky says fast. So cards that say fast or have that lightning bolt symbol, you can activate those or play them from your hand, and they don't count as an action. They're free to do. You might have to pay resources, but they don't count against your 3 actions for the round. You get something, basically you get a nice quick bonus you can do. So, we played a card as one of our actions. So now, I can't play anything else right now, because this guard dog costs 3, but I only have 2 resources. These are for skill checks, which I'm not doing right now, because I have nothing to fight against. And then we have evidence, which I could play, because it only costs 1 resource. But its ability is fast, which means I get to do it and doesn't count against an action. Play after you defeat an enemy, which I'm not doing yet, so I can't do anything. So we're actually going to keep getting prepared for Zoe. So we're going to do the really inefficient action of getting a resource. And then our last action is we're going to spend those 3 resources to play our guard dog into our ally slot. So what does the guard dog do? As a reaction, when an enemy attack deals damage to the guard dog, I can deal 1 damage back to that enemy. That's pretty cool. So we don't need to worry about that until enemies come up. So Zoe's done. That's her 3 actions. So now we go to Wendy. What can Wendy do? So Wendy has no assets to put into play permanently. So that's kind of unfortunate. But we do have this emergency cash. It costs 0 to play in its event, so it's a 1-shot. What does it do? It gives us 3 resources. So we're going to spend an action to play this e-cash, which goes right to the discard pile, and we just get 3 resources. And that's all it does. So Wendy has something really else to do. She has 8 resources. She's doing really good on money, so we don't need to get more money. We don't need to draw cards yet right now either. But Wendy has 3 book, and this has 2 shroud. So we could investigate, and we have a pretty good chance. So let's do an investigate action. So what happens now is we have to decide if we want to commit cards to this investigation check to give us a boost. I don't want to do a boost yet. Let's just see what happens. So after we decide if I want to commit cards to myself, I don't. Zoe's not going to help out. Now you would draw 1 chaos token from the chaos bag, and this is going to give you a modifier. So in this case, we get a +1 to our skill. So we're at 3 + 1, which is 4. That's at a 2, so we beat it. So we get 1 clue off the location. Each investigation gives you 1 clue if you pass. And then any skill check in the game, you pass as long as you tie. If you tie the number, you still pass. And then some advice in the game, before you draw your token out of the bag, if you're 2 above, you're at a pretty good place. So let's say I had a 4 here for my book, 4 to 2, you're in a very good place to pass. If you're at 3 or above, you're in a very solid place to pass if you're playing a normal difficulty. 3 up is a very good spot. 2 up is a very safe spot. So there's modifiers in the deck that there's 1 + 1, there's zeros, there's -1s, 2s, 3s, 4s, and there's also symbol tokens that change based off what the scenario is. If you draw a symbol out of the bag, you'll look at the scenario card and it tells you what that symbol does to your modifier. There's also this horrible red token, which is an auto fail. If you draw this, no matter what you did, your test is done and it fails. And then you also have this elder sign, which gives you a boost based off of your character specifically. So if you draw this, you look at your character to see what you get. And this auto fail, it automatically puts you to 0. So this might be more information that's needed, but modifiers, like if you had a 1 in a stat and you draw -2, you don't go to -1 in the stat, it just gets defaulted to 0. All right, so that was 2 actions. She played emergency cash to give her some resources, and then she investigated and passed. So let's just try and investigate again and see what happens. So we're still at 3 to 2. We're not going to commit anything. Oh, -4. Oh, okay, so this sets us to 0. So we're at 0 to 2. So we fail. Nothing bad happens if you fail. That's it. You just failed the test. But Wendy's playing Survivor, which means she likes failing. So let's look at what we have in her hand. So Lucky, we can spend a resource as a fast action. Play when you would fail a skill test. We would get +2 to that skill value. So we would go from 0 to 2, which lets us tie that. So we would pass it. It gets us another clue. But there's also, look what I found. Fast, play after you fail a skill test by 2 or less. We're at 0 to 2, so we would fail by 2. While investigating, discover 2 clues at your location. We're going to play this guy. So we play that. It's fast, so it doesn't count as an action. We spend the 2 resources on it, and we get the ability. Because we failed a skill test by 2 or less, because remember we get modified to 0, not -1. 0 to 2. We get to take 2 clues off this location. So Wendy had a really solid turn. Got 3 clues off. So we got some stuff out. Looking really good for us. So that's the 3 actions for Wendy. Now, all of our investigators have done their 3 actions. So now we would move on to the enemy phase, which there's no enemies out, so we can just skip this. Next, we go to upkeep. So upkeep, typically if you're playing in person, after you finish your actions, you would flip your character over to their noir side to indicate that your round is over. So if you do that in real life, my friends and I don't. If you do that though, you would unflip them. Then next, you ready all your exhausted cards. Some cards might say exhaust on them to activate them, and that just means tap. If you're familiar with card games, this should be very, very straightforward for you. If anything is tapped or exhausted on your character, you would unexhaust it. And then each investigator gets to draw a card and get a resource. So in TTS, it's nice. You just hit the upkeep button, gives you the resource, draws you your card. And then we check our hand size. So you have a hand size of 8. You can have more than 8 during the round, but by the end of the round, you can be only at a max of 8. So we're at 4, so we're good here. And we're at 4 here, so we're good here. And something to keep in mind, this whole ready all exhausted cards, if for some reason there's exhausted enemies, they also unexhaust at this point. And that is a full round of Arkham. However, we are now on to round 2, which starts the actual full round sequence off. So now in round 2, we start with the Mythos phase, which is the way the game plays against us. So the first thing you do during the Mythos phase is you will take a Doom token, and this starts a new round, and add it to here. So TTS, you just click on this. So now we're at 1 Doom. The next thing you do is check the Doom to the Doom threshold, which is this number that was here on this agenda card. So we're at 1 to 3. Once this Doom would go to 3, this advances, which is not good for us. So right now, this is like our clock for the game. So 1 to 3, we don't advance this. The next thing that happens, starting with the lead investigator, we'll just say the lead investigator was Zoe, and then going clockwise around the table, each investigator draws a card off of the encounter deck, which is the bad deck, and the encounter deck is modified based off the scenario you're playing. So we will draw our bad card, and you immediately resolve it. So Grasping Hands, Treachery, it's a hazard. Revelation, Test, Agility 3. For each point you fail by, take a damage. So Zoe's Agility is at a 2, which is not great. And we have to test against a 3. I don't have any cards to commit that have Agility on them. Wendy and I are in the same room, so she could help me out. And she has this manual Dexterity here, which gives me +2. So Wendy's going to be nice and give that to us. So now Zoe has 4. 2 from her and 2 from this. So we're at 4 to 3. And we draw a token out of the bag now. We get a -2. So we're at 2 to 3. And this says for each point you fail by, take a damage. So we failed by 1, so we have to take 1 damage on Zoe. Now, the thing though with dealing damage, if it says take a damage or take a horror, and you have allies out, you can mitigate that damage however you would like to your allies instead. So I could have pushed my dog into these Grasping Hands for me and had the dog get grabbed and given my dog the damage. And just like your investigator, if their damage or their horror ever gets maxed out to these numbers, they are defeated and they go to your graveyard, your discard pile. But for Guard Dog, I didn't want to give him the damage yet because he gets a benefit. So anytime he gets damaged by an enemy, he does a damage back. So I want to make sure he's at full health so he does more damage to enemies later. And then once you resolve your bad card, it gets discarded. Now Wendy has to draw a bad card, and then this manual Dexterity goes away. And then this card says, if the test is successful, draw a card. So Wendy would have gotten to draw a card because it was her card. But because we failed the test, she doesn't. And now Wendy draws something bad. What does she get? And we have our first enemy of the game, the Ghoul Minion. So enemies have some stats you need to look at. So first we have the name of the card. We have some traits about the card here, humanoid monster ghoul. The next things to look at are these three numbers up here. So we have a 2 in red next to this fist. This is the number you're going to be testing against when you want to fight the enemy. You'll be testing your fist against the enemy's fist. The middle number is how much health they have. So this ghoul minion has 2 health. And then this green number next to the foot is the agility test. So if you want to try to evade your enemy, you have to test against that number with your agility, your foot score. And then under here is just some flavor text and then the picture. And then here we have health and sanity. If you get attacked by an enemy, you take both of these down here. So if you get attacked by the ghoul minion, you would take 1 health and 1 sanity. And if you draw an enemy, you immediately take it and put it in what is called your threat area right here, which means it just goes in front of you, and now this is something you have to deal with until it goes away. So now that we have an enemy out, we have some new actions we can talk about. And then at this point, you've basically learned all the actions in the game. So now it would go to the investigator phase because we each drew our bad card, and now we can pick who wants to go first. So Wendy has this enemy on her and needs to get rid of it, and Zoe can help her fight it. So we have some options. Something to talk about now, though, is if you have an enemy in your threat area, it is called or said to be engaged with you. If you are engaged with an enemy, there's only certain actions you're allowed to take. So if you're engaged with an enemy, you can only fight, evade, or activate a parlay or a resign ability, and those are only going to be on cards, so you don't have to worry about these right now. So only thing we can do is fight or evade. You're allowed to do other things if you want. You can do any action that you would like, but if you're engaged with an enemy, if you do anything besides fight or evade that enemy, before you're allowed to do that action, they attack you. So if Wendy right here wants to investigate to try to get that last clue off, she sure can, but she'll take a sanity and a health damage first before she's allowed to do that, which isn't great. You don't want to take unnecessary damage if you don't have to. So what are these fight or evade actions you can do? So what you can do now is if Wendy wanted to go first, for example, she could try to evade this ghoul minion. So she would test her agility versus this ghoul minion's agility. So 4 to 2, she would draw a token out of the bag, -2, so we'd be at 2 to 2. And since we tied, we pass. Now, what does it mean if you successfully evade an enemy? They disengage from you, and they go to the location that you're in, exhausted. So now that this enemy's exhausted in here, they won't be able to do anything for this next round. Which is good. It helps you delay some stuff. However, that only puts a band-aid on the situation. The ghoul is still going to be in the room, and he's still potentially going to do something bad to you. What's more efficient is to just kill the enemy outright, because that gets rid of them and they go to the discard pile. Now, Wendy's fight is very bad, but that's what we have Zoe for, because she is our fighter with her 4th fist. So we're going to have Zoe go first so she can fight and kill this ghoul minion. So another action you can take, so we learned about fighting and evading, and now the other action you can take is called engaging. If there's an enemy at your location not already engaged with you, then you can engage them as an action. So I could be really nice and pull this ghoul minion off of Wendy and take it to Zoe. I'm going to engage it for her so she doesn't have to deal with it. And that will be Zoe's first action. She's going to engage the ghoul minion, which is great because, remember, Zoe has an ability. After you become engaged with an enemy, gain a resource. So because I got that enemy, I get a resource now. All right. So now Zoe is going to fight and try to kill this ghoul minion. So she could fight normally and just do, I'm going to just say I'm going to do a fight action. And then I would just look at this number here, 4 to 2, and draw a token out of the bag. And if I'm successful, I will do 1 damage to the ghoul minion. Any fight action always just does 1 damage, just like any basic regular investigate action only nets you 1 clue. But we have a weapon here. We have this machete, which we, as an action, we can activate it, which we're going to do. And it says here, as an action, fight, you get +1 fist for this attack. So we're now at 5 against this Ghoul Minions 2. We're up by 3, which is very good. And then if the attacked enemy is the only enemy engaged with you, you deal +1 damage. And it is the only enemy engaged with us. So if we hit with this, we do 2 damage to it, which would just outright kill it. Pretty amazing. So we're gonna do that. We're gonna fight with our machete. And it doesn't say exhaust on it, so we don't have to exhaust it. So we're at 5-2. We draw the cultist. So now we have to go up to the top here and see what the cultist does. And in this situation, it gives us a -1. If you fail, take 1 horror, which would be your sanity damage. So -1 is not something we need to worry about. So we're at 5, -1 at 4, 4-2. We hit. We do 1 base damage for hitting it, and we do 1 extra damage from a machete. So we're at 2-2, which kills it, which is great. So then these health tokens go away, and then the Ghoul Minion gets discarded. And then something I forgot to mention is the Mythos bag, where you're drawing your Chaos tokens out of, it will never diminish or, thin out or anything. After your test is over, the token you draw goes immediately back into the bag. There's no dilution of the bag ever. So the token went back, we killed that guy, great. And Zoe still has an action left. But look at this. We have evidence in our hand. Fast, after you defeat an enemy, discover a clue at your location. Well, we just killed something, and we have the money to play this, so discard 1 resource. Play this event, evidence, for 1. And then we killed an enemy, and there's a clue left, so we can grab that clue off. There we go. And that's the last clue on that location. And remember, this says that we just need to have 4 clues. And we have our 4 clues. So at this point, we can decide whenever we want, because there's no condition on this card, when to spend these clues and advance this. So I could have Zoe finish her turn out, and then we can advance it. We can finish our whole investigation round out, and then advance it. But I think we're just going to push it now, because Zoe has an action left. Maybe there's something beneficial she can do. So the way you advance this then is, we have the 4 clues, so you have to spend all those clues to advance it. So Zoe loses her 1. Wendy loses her 3. That's 4 clues, and then we can advance this card here, which, what does that mean? We take it and flip it over and read what's on the back. The door on the floor. You notice that the edges of your newly purchased rug are tattered and mud-stained. Finding this odd, you shift the furniture aside and pull back the rug. To your surprise, you see the doorknob, or the door leading out of your study. You slowly turn the knob, and the door swings open, revealing your hallway below. You jump through the doorway, landing on your feet on soft dirt. Door to the study slams shut above you. The smell of burning wood fills the narrow hall, intermingled with the scent of rotten decay. And now the card is going to tell us to do some stuff. So first, put into play the set-aside hallway, cellar, attic, and parlor. So you will go to your set-aside cards, and the scenario will tell you how to do that when you set everything up. So we get these additional locations now. And it says to put them into play. So how do we put locations into play? So remember, there was that icon on the study I mentioned before. So what do these icons mean? Well, this will show you. So these icons will tell you how locations are connected to one another. So this hallway is the square one, and we can see that which is the location icon for that location, and these underneath tell you what locations they're connected to. So this is connected to triangle, which is this attic. It's also connected to the plus, which is the cellar, and it's connected to green diamond, which is the parlor. But all of these are only connected to the hallway. So this kind of tells us the hallway is going to be in the middle. So let's set this up like a house would be. So the attic would be above, the cellar would be below, and we'll just say the parlor is off to the side over here. Now, the physical copy of the game doesn't come with these location trackers, but my physical copy, I bought some. They're very helpful. If you ever buy this game, I highly recommend even just drawing some arrows on a piece of paper and putting in between locations. It's way easier to visually see right away where you can go rather than have to keep track of these icons. All right, discard each enemy in the study. Place each investigator in the hallway and remove the study from the game. Okay, if there's no enemies, then we each get to go into the hallway. The study gets removed from the game. And then we'll put the cellar right here below where the study used to be. And remember, once you move into a location, these go into play on their unrevealed sides. Since we moved into this location, we get to immediately reveal it. So, hallway. A moment of panic and disorientation strikes as you land upon the floor of the hallway. The world spins as if turned on its head. All right. One shroud, but there's no clues here, which is unfortunate. The walls of your house are splattered with mud, and your hardwood floor is gone, replaced with a dirt path. Okay. Then after we do everything on the back of this card, we get to read the front of the next card. So, what does this one say? The barrier. A glowing barrier blocks the path to your parlor. As you move toward it, intense heat forces you to back away. Picking up a handful of dirt, you toss it at the barrier and watch in horror as the dirt incinerates. Perhaps there's something in the cellar or attic that can help. Objective. When the round ends, investigators in the hallway may, as a group, spend the requisite number of clues to advance. So we need 3 clues per investigator, so we need 6 total clues between the two of us. And just keep in mind, this per investigator does not mean each investigator has to have 3 clues. Just, we need to have 6 among the group. And so unlike the first one, which didn't say when we could spend these clues, this one tells us exactly when we're allowed to spend our clues to move on. So when the round ends, so after all the upkeep, and we have to be in the hallway to spend these clues. We can't be anywhere. All right. So Zoe still has an action left. So we got some new locations in here. So let's see what these locations say. So the attic says, the smell of rotten meat assaults your nostrils as you approach the attic stairs. Typically, the locations on their unrevealed side will give you some flavor text that might give you an idea of what might be going on the revealed side. So it's something important to look at. The cellar. The stairs leading down to your cellar are slick, and they glisten with a thin layer of ice. Then parlor. The entrance to the parlor is blocked by a darkly glowing, unfathomable barrier. You cannot move into the parlor, so we can't even go here yet. You're unsure what would happen if you tried to cross the threshold of the strange barrier, but based on its extreme heat, you sure as hell don't want to try. Alright, so there's one other action we didn't talk about, and that's just moving. So as an action, you can move into a connected location. So Zoe's going to finish this round off, for her round off, by moving into something. Let's have her move into the attic. So you just follow the path, and remember, if you moved into some place that's on its unrevealed side, you immediately get to reveal it. So attic, 1 shroud, 2 clues per investigator, so we get 4 clues on here, which is nice. Some clues to get off. Forced. This means you immediately have to do what this says. So forced, after you enter the attic, take 1 horror. Ooh. So Zoe has to take a horror. And remember, she could give this to her ally, the guard dog, but her guard dog only has 1 sanity. So if she does that, her guard dog is dead, which is not great. So we should just take the sanity damage. So we're at 5 now. Something to keep in mind with this game, too, is, especially for me when I first played this, I looked at these 2 numbers as, like, I can't lose anything. Health and sanity are also a resource. Use them to your advantage. Know when to lose them and when you don't need to lose them. All right. And then what else do we have on this card? So the bloody carcass of a malformed beast swings from a meat hook chained to the ceiling. Blood drains slowly from the carcass, dripping into a small barrel. Ugh. Victory 1. What does victory do? So victory on cards earns you experience at the end of the scenario. So if you're playing a full campaign, each victory you earn at the end of a scenario, each investigator gets that much XP, and you can use that XP to buy cards to upgrade your deck, which we won't talk about in this video. This is just how to play the game. We'll talk about upgrading later. And the way you get victory point off of location cards is by the end of the scenario, all the clues need to be off this location. So even if there's 1 clue left here, we do not get this at all. All 4 of these clues need to go away for us to get this 1 victory point. And victory points are very important. So that's it for Zoe. She did her 3 actions. So now let's go to Wendy. So there's no clues here for Wendy to grab. So let's see what we can do. But Wendy got an asset finally. She got some lockpicks. So let's go ahead and do our first action to play these lockpicks. So we will spend the 3 resources and put these lockpicks into our hand slot. Now what do these say? Exhaust lockpick. So if you want to activate these, we have to exhaust it. Investigate. add your foot value to your skill value for this investigation. So what's the skill value? It's always book when you're investigating. So we would get to add our foot to our book. So we'd be testing at a 7, which is really high. But if you do not succeed by at least 2, you discard your lockpicks. So there's a chance you just lose these outright. So they're very good, but they're very fragile. So, well, we have lockpicks, so let's get some clues. So let's have Zoe just go, or Wendy, let's have her follow Zoe up into here. So her second action, she's going to follow Zoe into the attic. And then our third action, let's investigate this location. So it's only at a 1. And we have a book of 3. That's our last action. Let's just like expend our lockpicks and just hope for the best. So we're testing at 7, because remember we add our foot to our into our book value for this. So we're at 7 to 1. And a skull. Oh no, what does the skull do? We check the scenario card. Minus X. X is the number of ghoul enemies at your location. Well, there's no ghouls at our location, so it's a 0. So Wendy passes very strongly, so we don't lose our lockpicks, and she gets 1 clue off of the location. And that's her 3 actions. So now we would go to the enemy phase. So there's no enemies because we killed that ghoul. But let's say we didn't. What would happen here? We'll explain this, and we're pretty much done with the teach of the game, and you pretty much know everything at this point. So we'll do one more round, and then we'll say that's the end of the teach. So let's say we didn't kill this ghoul minion. Something bad happened, and we didn't kill it. We will keep this on us. So what happens during the enemy phase? First, enemies with the hunter keyword move toward the nearest investigator. Some enemies might have the word hunter on it. And if they do, let's say this ghoul minion had hunter on it and it was in the cellar. It would move 1 location towards the investigators. So if it was in the cellar, it would move into the hallway chasing us. But if it's already engaged with the investigator, it just stays where it is. And next, each engaged enemy attacks if able. So if you're engaged with an enemy, at this point, it will hit you for its health and its sanity damage. So this ghoul minion would hit me for 1 health and for 1 sanity. But remember, I have an ally out, so I can mitigate this however I want. I could take the sanity and give the health to the dog. I could give both to the dog. I could take both. Like, you can do this however you like. And that's for every enemy. So if Zoe had 3 ghoul minions in play, and they would all attack her here, so she would be taking 3 health and 3 sanity, and you can mitigate that however you would like from your allies. We don't have to worry about it because the ghoul minion was killed. So after the enemy phase, now we go back to upkeep. So we would unflip our cards, and then we would ready all of our exhausted cards, so her lockpicks are good to go again. And then we each get a resource and draw a card. Cool. And then we check our hand size, and 4 and 3, neither of us are over 8, so we are good. And then the round would start over again, and the first thing we do is add a doom to the agenda. Check the doom threshold. We're at 2 to 3, so nothing happens. This wouldn't flip. And then starting with the lead investigator, we will draw cards off the encounter deck. So Zoe gets a Ravenous Ghoul, which says Prey on it. So Prey, lowest remaining health. So as I mentioned before, if you draw an enemy, you immediately put it in your threat area. So why does this Prey thing matter then? If it's lowest remaining health, which is not Zoe, but she drew it, so she has to take it. So how does that work? So let's say, for example, there was the end of the round, and at some point this Ravenous Ghoul was evaded and was exhausted in the attic. Remember, during upkeep, everything exhausted unexhausts, including enemies. So if this enemy would unexhaust at this point, it then would look at this Prey thing because we're both in the room, and then it would have to go to Wendy because Wendy has the lowest health between the two of us. So we look down here, she has 7 and Zoe has 8. So this would have to go to Wendy. That's why Prey is important. And something to keep in mind with enemies too, if there's ever an enemy in a location, the moment an investigator moves into that location, that enemy immediately engages them as well. So as mentioned before, how I said evading an enemy is a good temporary fix to a problem. they're still going to be there. They're going to be unexhausted at some point, and you might get engaged with them again. So just killing him outright if you can is definitely the best. But Zoe drawing an enemy is totally fine, because remember her ability, anytime you become engaged with an enemy, you get a resource. So Zoe gets more money. And that's all we do for there. And then now Wendy gets to draw a card, and she gets Ancient Evils. Revelation, which means do it right away. Place 1 Doom on the current agenda. This effect can cause the current agenda to advance. So typically you only check Doom and the Doom threshold after you put the Doom marker up. But now this card says it can just advance it right away. So we immediately have to put a Doom out, which then hits this threshold, which means we have to advance this according to this card. So we would flip this over and read what it says. A lapse in time. Your house continues to change before your very eyes. The walls have decayed and the ground in many rooms has turned to dirt. It's almost as if you have been transported somewhere else entirely, although every now and again you recognize elements of your former home. The lead investigator must decide, so this is the point where, remember saying a lead investigator is important, they might have to make decisions. Either each investigator discards 1 card at random from his or her hand, or the lead investigator takes 2 horror. So Zoe's the lead, and Zoe has to either take 2 horror, or Zoe and Wendy discard a card. Well, Zoe only has 5 sanity left, which is not a lot. But they both have a decent amount of cards in their hand, so Zoe's going to pick, they each have to discard a random card from their hand. So, let's see what they each discard. Okay, Zoe loses an Overpowered. And then Wendy is going to lose, more than likely, a Lucky. But that's okay, because we have an extra one in her hand. Yep, a Lucky. Okay. And then these 2 cards go back to her hand. That's the bad stuff, and then we go right back into an investigation phase. And the investigators get to do their 3 actions. And at this point, the game will continue like we've been seeing. That's pretty much the game. So Mythos phase, add the Doom, check the threshold. Everyone draws a bad card, starting with the lead investigator going clockwise. Investigation phase, each investigator takes 3 actions. Remember, turn order is not fixed, but you have to take all 3 of your actions before the next investigator can go. And your actions that you can possibly take are drawing a card, or gaining a resource, playing a card from your hand, activating a card that's in front of you if it has this solid arrow, move to a location, investigate a location, fight an enemy, evade an enemy, or engage an enemy. And that's it. That's everything you can do. And remember, if you're engaged with an enemy, you can do any action you want, but if you do anything besides fight or evade, or these 2 special parlay or resign actions that will show up on cards in the game, they get an attack of opportunity against you, which means they immediately attack you for their damage first before you get to do your action. And then after each investigator's done their stuff, we go to an enemy phase. If there's any enemies with Hunter, they will move towards the closest investigator. And then anyone engaged with enemies, they will get attacked by those enemies. And then we go to upkeep. And you ready your exhausted cards. You will draw a card and gain a resource. Enemies also unexhausted at this point. And then each investigator checks their hand size for having more than 8 cards, and you discard down. And that's basically the game. I think the only other thing I wanted to bring up, and then that'll be it, is if you ever draw an enemy that says spawn on it, like this Flesh Eater, you do not draw it into your location. They will get spawned into the location that it says. So like if Zoe drew this, it wouldn't go into her threat area, it would just go into the attic. But if Zoe happens to be in the attic, then she would get it. So she would still get it no matter what. And that's the game. So, as a quick teach, if you have any questions about the teach, or things were unclear, please leave a comment below. In the next video, we will talk about deck building and deck upgrading, and potentially finish as runoff. So, thank you for watching. I hope this teach was very helpful to you. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to send me a message or comment below. Thanks, everyone.